All right, everyone, welcome back. We are going to talk about some pretty cool stuff today. Catherine Clinton is joining us. So first of all, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much. It's an honor and a pleasure to talk with you today.
No, it's a pleasure because I mean, I've been listening to some of what you talk about, and just so everyone knows, we're going to dive into quantum biology today. Most people have now started scratching their heads, like, what are you talking about? You're going to find out, and you're going to love it. So it was funny because there's a video you had put out about structured water, and I watched it. I was like, wow, Catherine is speaking my language, but I need to know more, because the depth of knowledge you were putting out there was comprehensive. It's like not a lot of people know so much about this stuff in this world. And so that's why you're here today. So just for the layperson, what is quantum biology? Why is quantum biology? What are we talking about here?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a great question. People hear the word quantum and they start to think woo-woo, strange things, but quantum physics is the most substantiated theory out there. It's the most successful theory we have to date to explain things, and that applies to our biology as well. So quantum biology is really talking about how life works at the nano size, how photons of light impact our biology, photons of sound, frequency information, electromagnetic fields, and this is within the body and external to the body. So we're talking about how quantum phenomenon are at play in these nano-sized workings in our body, our enzymes, our proteins, and the electron transport chain and the mitochondria, just the flow of electrons and protons maintaining that negative charge that we need for life. And that's what we're talking about. And it just, spider webs out to touch so many different topics.
And I think up until recently, people just didn't look at this realm of science in the context of health. It was more like the context of trying to understand the body and biological function, but it was nobody was dipping into to say, how do I use this to improve my health outcome? But now we're learning this is exactly where we should be starting, because it's the innate, foundation of every biological process. And if you understand how these work, you can then start to tune those dials and make things better. So how did you stumble into this? Why is this all in your head, first of all?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. It was my second year of naturopathic medical school, and I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, an autoimmune condition that affects the colon. And I was diagnosed with Hashimoto thyroiditis, which is another autoimmune condition that affects the thyroid gland. I was diagnosed with Lyme disease and multiple spirochete infections. And I was in the perfect place. I was in naturopathic medical school. I was down the hill working in tandem with an allopathic medical school up the hill doing research on cortisol. I was across the river from an acupuncture school. So I was in the perfect place to get all the tools to help me put my physical health back together. And I did that. I was able to return to school in the clinic, but there was something missing. And if anybody out there is listening who has had a chronic disease, they know that getting back to that picture of health before they were diagnosed is not really the optimum. And so that's when I started researching psychoneuroimmunology. And that's just a big word for how our thoughts and emotion impact our biology. And Martin Picard has done amazing research on how our emotions impact mitochondrial function. And it was there that the doors kind of flew wide open. And I think it was Sayer G that also about 10 years ago shared an article about the ability in our body to utilize light for biological action. And so those things together just led me down this road of quantum biology and how these smaller pieces are really working on a whole nother level. When I was in school, I learned Newtonian biology based on Newtonian physics, right? It's that key and lock receptor model where we have in each of our cells, we have over 100,000 tasks happening each second. And we have trillions of cells. And this is very accepted science, but it is impossible with Newtonian biology, Newtonian physics. It's absolutely impossible. That's where quantum biology comes in and answers these questions of how things can be happening at such a fast rate within the body, how we can communicate over long distances in the body using something that's not chemical or mechanical, using resonance, using frequency. It's absolutely incredible. We now know that proteins, which are really the driver of biological action, right? We used to think that the nucleus of a cell was the brain, right? That was the driver of the cell, the driver of biological action. Now we know that the proteins embedded in that bilipid membrane, that cell membrane, those are what's really acting to initiate biological action. And when we look at the research with quantum biology, those proteins are acting via resonance, like tuning forks. So you can have one protein vibrating at a certain frequency, and another protein, if it's meant to vibrate at the same frequency, will pick up that frequency just like a tuning fork. And so you have this communication within the body that, like you said, quantum biology doesn't negate Newtonian biology or physics. It just adds this layer where we see that Newtonian model really rises up from this quantum action. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, they both are sort of happening in tandem. But what you're saying is that, so we think of any physical interaction as something moving from here, from A to B. There's some form of transfer, but what we're saying in the quantum realm, it's all instantaneous and it's all everywhere all at the same time, because when you're using things like frequency and resonance, there's no distance to travel, right? There is, but the speed and rate and the mechanism by which it happens, you can use these tools differently. And so we change the way we think about the way our body works. Things can be instantaneous, then things can be outside of ourselves. Frequency emits and is received, through the skin, beyond it. So we really have to change the way we think about what our bodies are actually capable of. And that's part of the work you've been doing. And so I know a lot of what you do and teach and use to heal is, okay, here's the body. We talked about what's going on the inside, but your body is in an environment where it's exposed to what you're sitting on, what you're standing on, what you're breathing, what you're exposed to. You mentioned light, so we can start there as an example. So light being, we think of something that allows us to see and something that makes us feel warm, but there's so much more to it. So maybe we can start there and use that as an example of how we're interacting with our environment.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's a huge field, right? So looking at how light affects our biology, I think the starting point really is acknowledging that we are circadian driven beings, right? We are diurnal beings. We are supposed to be up with the sun, in bed when it goes down. Every single clock in our body has a circadian clock in it. And when light hits our retina, that vibratory oscillation travels through our nervous system to every single peripheral circadian clock and all of those different cells. And what this does is it initiates our metabolism. It regulates our immune system, our digestive system, our respiratory system, our cardiovascular system. I mean, kidney function, spleen function. It just goes down the line. There's not, it touches everything because everything is circadian driven. And when you look at what's happening in modern life, we are really, we've walked away from that relationship with the sun. And just that power of becoming aligned with the sun, meaning that we get sun in the AM, and it doesn't have to be long, 15 minutes, eat your breakfast, drink your coffee or tea outside. And whenever I talk about sun exposure, people have this idea that it's beautiful sun, it's summer sun, it's that wonderful sun, right? And I live here in Oregon, the Pacific Northwest. Our sun is gray for many months. Yeah. And that gray sun also has medicine, right? It also has the power to align our circadian rhythm. So that's sort of the starting point that I talk about with my patients, is that all of our processes that are happening in our body start with that circadian alignment. And if that is off, we're going to have a hard time coming to balance in our immune system, our inflammatory state. And when we look and sort of tease this apart, we see that that sunlight is initiating so many different hormonal cascades. It's initiating that dumping of serotonin, our dopamine, our cortisol response. And this also goes throughout the day. And when we lower the lights when the sun goes down, then some of those hormones are then transmuted into other hormones that help us sleep. For example, getting that AM light in the sun in the morning, getting that sunlight in the morning allows us to dump serotonin, that happy, creative, feel good hormone. And then lowering the lights at night takes that serotonin and transfers it into melatonin, so that we get the repair and the sleep that we need, and the autophagy in our mitochondria, so that we're getting rid of cells that are damaged, that might be cancerous. There's really this yin yang sort of relationship that we have with light. And many of us are not lowering the lights at night. We are inundated with blue light that doesn't even have the full spectrum of blue, right? Our artificial lights are very heavy in one frequency of blue light. And of course, the sunlight has blue light in it as well, but it has a rhythm to that blue light. And it definitely isn't the predominant frequency when the sun goes down at sunset and when the sun is down. There isn't a mechanism for our body to understand, like, oh, this is just a screen. I'm just chilling out, watching a couple TV shows before bed. Our body takes that as a cue to keep producing hormones and actions like we are in noontime sun. But really, we need to be preparing for that repair. It affects our growth hormone. All of those things are really circadian driven. And so it really starts to stack up once you start teasing the pieces of this out.
Yeah, but we don't appreciate sort of the brilliance of how our body's constantly responding to any stimulus or input. And we don't know. You're walking around like, okay, I'm going to turn the lights on, not understanding the implication of your body doesn't know that that's an artificial switch. Your body doesn't know that that's a laptop. It's still thinking that you're living in a cave, and the lights, it's not what you think. And so that understanding the environmental cues and what they trigger in terms of biochemistry can dramatically shift how you feel, and so now we've understood light. What is all this talk about people going out of their homes barefoot and standing on the earth, or even earthing, I think it's called? What's going on there in terms of that connection with, is there frequency being emitted from the soil? Is it what is actually the mechanism of what's happening there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to tie that in with a little bit about what light's doing as well, because we in a Newtonian biology model, we learned that we get energy from food, and that's turned into ATP, our energy currency in the body, right? But what we now know is that certain frequencies of light actually help increase that flow of electrons. So if that statement was true, if we could really just get our energy for our mitochondria and all of our functions from food, then we wouldn't be in the middle of this obesity epidemic that we are in,
Mhm.
right? There's something else at play. And now we're starting to understand that light, we actually have proteins in the electron transport chain that can grab that photon of light and use it to make ATP and make those electrons flow more efficiently through the ETC in the mitochondria, that electron transport chain. And when we look at earthing, we see the same thing happening. We see that there is this infinite sea of electrons that lines our earth. And that is being supplied by this exchange between the surface of our earth and the ionosphere up there in the sky. And those charges build up in clouds and are released. That negative charge is released via lightning. And
Mhm.
so these lightning charges disperse over the earth and create this field of free electrons. So when
Mm.
we put our body in contact with the earth, we are able to gather, collect those electrons from the earth and use them in our biology. And where do we see the impacts of this? We see it with inflammation, we see it with pain. There's wonderful studies out there talking about how grounding and earthing, coming in contact with the earth with our bare skin, allows us to create a much different picture cardiovascularly with our blood
Mm.
flow. We're able to charge those blood cells, so to speak, via that zeta potential. And we can get into that more if we want to, but basically we're just charging those red blood cells, and that negative charge is able to keep them separated and not clumping and flowing. We know that this has dramatic benefits on our blood flow, on our blood pressure. It's really phenomenal that we are able to access this energy from light, from soil, from the earth, from touching
Mm.
a tree, to power action within our body. It's completely a paradigm shift from what we find in textbooks that are in schools right now.
So is this something where, I mean, I'm starting to think of myself as a plant where I can sit there in a pot and do some photosynthesis and I get my energy. I guess it's more a question, to what degree is this possible? Meaning, average American, for example, goes out there, they are having their 3, 4 meals a day, and their body's gotten used to that being the sort of the calorie energy driver. Are there adjustments that can be made where your body can lean more on earthing, and or is it kind of like, here's the level that you do it and that's fixed? Or is it like going to the gym and you can train yourself to use more and more of that and less of food?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a balance to it, right? Um, I'm definitely not saying we don't need food, right? We
Hmm.
absolutely need those inputs for so many reasons, but we can fine tune our biology to make more energy from sources that are not food. Absolutely. We
Mm.
can fine tune our body to utilize light in different ways, to utilize these electrons from the earth. It's really phenomenal. And the research definitely backs this up. The benefits, we could just keep talking about the different, the very long list of disease states and organ health and systems health that this promotes in the body. So absolutely, I think that both are playing such a pivotal role in our health, but we only are looking at one right now.
Mm.
Um, and that needs to be expanded because there's so much energy out there for us to have and us to utilize. And this is the first step, is getting people to understand that that is available, it's free, it's accessible to people. Whenever I say this, people say, oh, well, I don't have time to stand on the earth barefoot
Mm.
for an hour or two. And we know that just a minute or two starts to calm the nervous system, which
Hmm.
calms inflammation. Just a 10-15 minute um, interaction with the flow of electrons that's lining the earth allows us to start regulating that blood pressure and that flow of blood. So it's absolutely, in my opinion, something that needs to be talked about and brought to the forefront when we're talking about medicine and talking about health and disease.
And when you say stand on the earth, does that mean like literally go out into the grass, or can I walk on pavement? Can I walk on my driveway? Like, how close do I need to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. The best way is to have your bare skin on the earth. So barefoot is very common and easy, but if that's not accessible, we can touch a tree, we can touch an animal that is in contact with the earth. Anything that's embedded in that sea of electrons is going to be transmitting that energy. But that's a great question about concrete. Concrete diminishes the flow of electrons and electricity. It's not as conductive as soil,
Mm.
but it absolutely will have some benefit. So you will get benefit from walking barefoot on concrete.
Mm.
Absolutely. Not as much, right? Because it's not as conductive, but there is still some. And so, when I get somebody from Manhattan talking about, I can't do this kind of stuff. The world is so much bigger
Mm.
than we think it is, right? So even though you are in your high rise and there isn't a tree in sight, you are still living on planet Earth, and we can
Yeah.
still access that energy. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so somebody that's like all I guess the only consideration would have to be, if you're in Manhattan, are you walking on a street that's above the subway where you're literally not, you're somewhat floating on the, are you actually on concrete that's on the ground? But just think about that and be cognizant of what you're trying to do. And essentially you need to be connected to the earth, and then you get that value and benefit. So I find that, I can go days where I have one meal and I'm hungry, but it's not a problem. Then I have friends that if they skip breakfast, they can't survive to lunch. Right. So is this because I've practiced and my body is adapted, and I don't feel tired. I go to the gym, before my meal, the very last hour of not having eaten, I'm at the gym pushing just as hard as if I had eaten a full day's worth of food. So how much time does it take to go from one extreme to the other?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with you. You are fine-tuned, and also you probably have a wonderful adrenal status health, right? So our adrenal glands they sit on top of our kidneys, and they secrete sort of our stress hormones, right? So if a bear were to jump into this room right now, my adrenal glands would secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine and cortisol and adrenaline so I could run away from the bear.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us in modern life have some kind of adrenal dysfunction so that our cortisol release is not the picture of health. It's dysfunctional in some way. And this comes back to what we talked about with that AM sunlight. Getting that sunlight in the AM sets up that cortisol pattern. And so if we have circadian disalignment or disruption where we're not aligned with the sun, if we have experienced times of chronic stress or trauma that we haven't recovered from, if we have infections that are driving that inflammatory state, affecting our cortisol secretion, all of those things, toxicity, if we're flooded with industrial pollutants, all of these things can impact our cortisol secretion and our adrenal function. So that would be something that I would think about too. And of course, that comes back to quantum biology,
Mm-hmm.
circadian biology. So you have been mindful of those things, and your systems are working in tandem. Whereas if somebody has had what we just talked about, toxin exposure, that can include mold, latent infections, a period of trauma or chronic stress that we haven't recovered from, all of those things are going to impact our cortisol secretion. And what we don't realize is that cortisol is in charge of our blood sugar as well. So if there's a problem there, there's going to be a problem with missing our meals and being able to, fine tune the machinery so that we can fast and then not, follow whatever kind of fasting schedule it is and not have those dips in blood sugar.
Now, so we've talked about earth, we've talked about light, and I've also heard you talk about wind, which I haven't heard anyone else talk about. So how does this, what's the implication there?
The implication there is the connection with a few different things. Our connection with weather. So not only do our cells have a circadian rhythm, but they have a rhythm that is aligned with a monthly cycle, with a seasonal cycle. So if we are living this sort of 70-degree life, right? So we stay inside and air conditioning in the summer and it's 70 degrees. When it's heated, we're at 70 degrees. We are missing that opportunity to have that input from different temperatures. And we see this at an extreme with cold exposure and heat exposure and how that is affecting our mitochondria and those quantum biological actions. But those really show a highlighted version of what happens yearly in our body, so that we need to be out in that cold in the seasonal winter or out in that heat sweating in the seasonal summer. And these things affect how our body regulates itself, how it maintains that inflammatory state. And so being exposed to the seasons is really important for our health, just like it is important to be exposed to natural sunlight, right? And within those seasons, within that relationship with nature, comes negative ions. So we talked a little bit about that lightning coming down and discharging that negative charge. That same thing is happening with negative ions. It's creating negative ions, which our body readily uses for immune system balance, inflammatory balance, as well as pain and mood. And negative ions are created from that coronal discharge with lightning. They're also created by something called the Lehner effect, where water is shearing itself. So when we are outside by the ocean or a river or a lake or a waterfall, or even if we're not by a water source, wind running through the forest, running through trees, running through a field of grass will also create negative ions that discharge in the wind. And we are able to collect those in our body, much the same way that we're talking about gathering energy from the soil and from the sun. And so that's what I'm talking about when it comes to wind. I'm talking about being in relationship with nature in a seasonal aspect, making sure that we're getting those temperature changes that really inform our metabolism, as well as actual wind. When we are by plants, it's going to create a flow of negative ions that our body can utilize.
Brilliant. I think that's when I think about the seasons, you think about a plant like a tree, and you can clearly see this regenerative process that it goes through year after year. Like it sheds its leaves, develops new leaves, and it grows a few inches, and it keeps going through that process. And we, many hundreds of, well, I guess it's a couple 100,000 years of us being in this genetic form on this planet, would have adopted and benefited from that season. We just don't see it, and even when it comes to our food supply and the seasonality of, what it would be in its natural state if we didn't go to big box grocery stores, I'm sure there's some connection there between the energy and the needs and the micronutrient content of the food that's available during different seasons. and what our bodies are going through regeneratively and what they're trying to, the repair that's constant, you know, that's for sure. So
Yeah.
you mentioned water as well. And that's actually where we originally first started chatting, because I saw a post you had put out about structuring water, and I was just starting to explore this myself. And it's a concept that still most have not heard of, but there's so much more to it than just structuring it. So first of all, what does that mean? You know, somebody has a glass of water and I've heard people say this, I only drink structured water. What does that even mean? And then how do we also look at water at the quantum level, and what do we need to know to maintain optimal health there?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's such a big topic. And, you know, the structuring water devices out there have done such an amazing job marketing that we often think of structured water just as what we're drinking, but there's a structured water formation within our own body as
Mm,
well. And when we look at these quantum phenomenon of quantum entanglement, protons, electrons in the
mm,
body, quantum tunneling in our proteins in the electron transport chain of the mitochondria, enzymes, immune system. It's looking like all of these phenomenon really happen at the interface of a biological surface and the water that covers it. Protein resonance that we were talking about in the beginning. So let's kind of piece this apart for
sure.
people. So structured water is, you know, there's two different things. When we're talking about drinking water, we're talking about adding energy into that water. And researchers have made the analogy that the hydrogens in water, it's almost like they are holding hands. They create a circle, and
Mm,
in that circle of hydrogens, tightly bound hydrogens, EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies, are able to penetrate these clusters, but nothing else is. And so when we have more of these clusters, researchers have called them, Gilbert Ling really talked about an excited phase of water and a ground phase of water. Albert St. Georgi and Mili Delgice really talked about coherent domains of water and incoherent, decoherent domains of water, talking about how there's a bulk phase of water, what we are used to thinking of as H2O. And
mhm,
when we add energy into the water, there are more coherent domains, more energized domains of water. And that actually can be transferred as benefits to the body. So when we are drinking this structured water, we get more health benefits. And this has been sussed out in the research with plants on an agricultural front, with animals and humans as well. So that's important. Another way to
mm,
get structured water is through, you know, coconut water, although it's high in sugar, that is a structured water. Our plants and vegetables, when we eat them, they have structured water inherently in them. And so these things are important. We can stir our water. We can put it out in the sun. Dr. Emoto, Veda Austin, they are doing amazing work with intentions and thoughts, being able to structure our water. And so there's so many different options out there for adding energy into our drinking water.
If you want to keep diving deeper with your prescription for life with the Unpilled podcast, make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. I've also written my first book, The DNA Way: Unlock the Secrets of Your Genes to Reverse Disease, Slow Aging, and Achieve Optimal Wellness. Take a look and enjoy, guys.
This is important.
mm,
It is a little bit different than forming structured water in the body. So when we have a hydrophilic surface, and Gerald Pollack and his team out of the University of Washington have done a wonderful job really laying this out. His book, The Fourth Phase of Water, lays it out clearly. And in the early 2000s, 2003, Pollack was the first to identify this fourth phase of water. So when we think about water, you know, I always thought of the oxygen with the two hydrogen ears, like these little Mickey Mouse heads that we're just
yeah.
drinking when we drink our water. But that's really a misnomer. Those hydrogens are always dancing. They're being cleaved and added to other molecules. It's this constant dynamic dance. And so when water is in contact with a hydrophilic surface, and we should say that our cell membranes, our mitochondria, our fascia, our vessels, all of these are hydrophilic in nature. And so what Pollack found was when you have water against these hydrophilic surfaces, it becomes structured and ordered. The molecules become aligned in this hexagonal, like a honeycomb. As yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. As one sheet of this lattice hexagonal structured water forms, it acts as a template for more layers to form. And as this builds against our cell membranes or our fascia or vessel walls, as this builds, it kicks out a hydrogen, a positively charged hydrogen. So what you have is this negatively charged structured water that's building. And right outside of that, you have what researchers are calling a water zone, a proton zone, a proton wire, a water wire, all kinds of different names for it. And what Pollack did was he put an electrode in the negatively charged water forming against that hydrophilic surface, and he put another one in that positive charged water that forms just outside the structured water. And the separation of charge, just like a 9-volt battery, it was enough to light a light bulb. And so this is the action that structured water has in our body. It has the ability to create biological action. One of my favorite studies that Pollack did was he recreated a collagen tube. And so our fascia has, we're used to the double helix with DNA. Our fascia creates, in that connective tissue of our fascia, collagen creates this triple helix, these collagen nanotubules, right? So we're down on the quantum level, and these collagen tubules, Pollack studied, they form structured water on the inside of them and on the outside of them. And you can see quite clearly that they power the flow of protons and water throughout the body. Wow. So yeah, absolutely amazing. So the dance between the water that's lining our cells and infrared energy, which can come in the form of sunlight, so many devices out there also do it, but also movement, right? Those collagen tubules are piezoelectric. So when we move them, they create an electrical charge that further structures this water and flow of information. And when we're talking about quantum biology, we're also talking about the ability of our body to quantum entangle protons and use them to send information. And quantum entanglement just refers to the idea that two or more systems, whether that's a proton or electron or an atom or a molecule, they can become entangled so that even though they are independent and they are not physically close, they are at a distance, they can communicate and they are interdependent. So if I know what's happening with one of those protons, I know exactly what's happening with the other one. They are these information gatherers and carriers. So it starts to look really incredible, this sort of quantum highway via our cell membranes, our fascia, our vessels, allowing for proton conduction, jump conduction throughout the body almost instantaneously. It's really mind-blowing.
It is so mind-blowing because at that nano level, I think we have ego problems where we think it's, nothing significant can happen at that tiny of a level. But that's where the most significant stuff is happening. It's unbelievable. It's like there's a whole universe inside our bodies functioning, right?
Yeah.
and we have no clue. We're just starting to learn all this stuff. So complex, but so perfectly balanced at the same time. If you think about what's happening and why it's happening, and unbelievable. So I heard you say that just putting your water out in the sun is enough to structure it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the really cool thing about structuring the water we drink or structuring the water inside of us. The ways we do that are very similar, right? We
Mm.
get out in the sun, we move our body, or we move the water.
Mm.
Natural spring water. One of my favorite apps out there, findaspring.com, allows you to find fresh natural spring water, and the vortexing of that water creates a naturally structured water.
Mm.
So yeah, adding infrared, adding energy in the form of movement, adding energy and frequency information in the form of thought. I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing that we have the ability to increase or decrease our ATP production in the mitochondria via our thoughts.
That's incredible. And we hear about this in, people like Joe Dispenza talking about this type of thing, but the mechanism of it is not common knowledge, I would say. Where like, well, how is that possible? A thought is something that happened in my head, but that thought actually has a physical structure. There's like a resonance to it. Maybe you can dive into that a little bit, because it's the limited thinking is I I had an idea, a memory, this thing that happened between my ears, but we never think about how did it happen? What's the actual science or biology of you experiencing that? And why does that then become a signal? So maybe you can tell us about that.
Yeah, it is absolutely fascinating. And we aren't exactly sure, when we start talking about biofield research and
Yeah.
how we can measure these things. I think in the next 5 years, I think we will really be able to sort of pinpoint these things thanks to quantum computing, right? All the money's being funneled into understanding these mechanisms for quantum computing and for some of the nano spaced medicine and pharmaceutical devices out there. But I think that we're really going to come to a conclusion with how does frequency information from thought impact our biology? And I think we will see that it follows the same path as protein resonance.
Mm.
So if I have two proteins that are trying to communicate with each other over long distances, it is done with a frequency of vibration. And that vibration is then felt or received or caught or trapped in the structured water of the receiving protein. So we can see quite clearly from the research that happens with proteins. And so now we need to expand that research with emotions and thoughts, but the thought being that we'll see the same mechanism of action, that resonance of thought and frequency are being received by that structured water that we just talked about, lining that protein. And Picard, like I said, Martin Picard has done wonderful work on this. And if you look at the research with psychoneuroimmunology, you can see quite clearly from a chemical model that our thoughts have a certain resonance that produce certain chemicals in the body that have reactions in our immune system, cardiovascularly, our inflammatory state. And now we're starting to really understand that these frequencies of thought, of music and sound, they have the ability to change the conformation of our proteins inside the body.
Hmm.
And so we are at the forefront of understanding how frequency and vibration of sound and thought and all of these things we've sort of disregarded in a healthcare setting, how they actually are creating a completely different set of building blocks when it comes to our cell workings. I mean, when we talk about our DNA, again, are hydrophilic in nature. They are completely covered with that structured water that we're talking about. And in essence, they act like a receiving antenna, right?
Mm-hmm.
So our DNA gives us those building blocks, those amino acids that we need for life, but it's really what is expressed in the DNA that becomes a state of health or a state of disease, right? So many of us think, oh, our genes make us sick, or our genes gave us this disease, but really genetic disease only accounts for a very, very, very small percentage of illness.
You know, the more I listen to you, the more I think that it started off, my perspective was that our bodies are able to utilize things from wind to light to water for our benefit. It
Yeah.
now sounds like all of these things were created for our bodies. It's like there's a symbiotic thing going on, this dual evolution, you know, there's us as human beings, there's a planet and what it does, and we were designed for each other. It's not a, you know, take advantage of this opportunity type statement. It's like, no, this is who you are, and all that microbiology, those nano jobs going on are designed for the context of our ancestors that were sort of intertwined with this planet, as opposed to, you know, abusing it or living in big cities or in a, you know, 30 floors up in the air. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. And so many of us talk about, the people that are talking about this do talk about it like, let's go extract that, like go out in the sun and get that hormone cascade, go put your feet in the ground and get those electrons. But really, my work started with unraveling my health journey and unraveling how trauma and early childhood trauma affects our biology 30 years later. And when I started to put the pieces together, all of it was wonderful for better health. But on a much deeper level, there's something absolutely incredible about finding safety in the world around you that you haven't found before, in your community, in your workplace, in your partnerships, in your family, being able to find a deep and true sense of safety with your relationship with the sun or the dirt beneath your feet or the wind or the seasons. Being held by nature like that, I really believe is the missing piece in so many people's health today. So I couldn't agree with you more. You said it perfectly.
And you see it, like, if we all know lots of people, and you see the people that are connected with the earth, whether it's a farmer, whether it's a hiker, you know, whether it's a weekend warrior, whatever, you'll see a very different health status than the lawyer who's in his office. And I think there was a study actually that was just put out that said that the healthiest and happiest people are farmers. And coincidentally, I just happened to drop the lawyer line, but the least happy and the least healthy are lawyers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it has a lot to do with the complete disconnect with our natural state versus the complete connection. And the people that had the longest longevity were actually beekeepers, you know, and it may have something to do with getting stung here and there, and who knows what's in that venom, you know. So there's something to be said about our ancestral habits that which we've lost, our connection with this planet and how we used to live and how we now live, and how we've changed the planet by building mega cities to strip nature away from ourselves. And that thing that is, we are now, call us parasites that are meant to be symbiotic and live off of this planet, are not getting any of that benefit because we've taken the planet away from ourselves by building concrete jungles, you know. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but yeah, so get out. The point is get out, go out somewhere, go hiking, go boating, go fishing, do whatever you can, get dirty, right? So
Yeah.
do you I didn't even ask you, do you practice like with patients clinically, or is this more research?
Yes, I practice with patients. I currently, my practice is closed to new patients. I have a very small practice that allows me to practice what I preach, first of all, and it allows
Mm,
me to research and write. And I also homeschool my two kids. So life is full and
mm,
wonderful, and I am able to see the benefits in all of that, right?
yeah,
So from the research, I'm able to apply that to my family, to my patient base, and I've seen incredible results by this. And I think that, there's so many wonderful devices and hacks out there, but really, this coming back to a person's relationship with the world around them,
mm,
not as an exercise to, a chore on the list to check off, but a real cultivation.
yeah.
I think that is where the magic really lies.
Yeah, connecting with the earth is not, it's exactly what you just said. It's not something on a checklist. It is your lifestyle, it is your habits, it is your surroundings, and it should be constant, and I feel it, since our reality shift and working from home, I
Mhm.
do spend more time outside because I'll take breaks and I'll go walk outside and I'll have my phone or my whatever. I can still pay attention. And I'll go down into the ravine behind our house. I'll go to the river. I'll go try and find a coyote walking around in the bush somewhere, which we do have near my home. And I feel different. And I feel this therapeutic almost sensation when I leave that, like when I go out into the woods and come back. I feel like I'm somewhat invincible. The stress is not a burden anymore,
Yeah.
right? And the energy is high, and so it's literally, there's an instantaneous therapeutic benefit. You will feel it, just like going into a sauna and getting that deep, feeling. It's the same thing with connecting, especially if you haven't been doing it regularly, you know.
Yeah.
So I would urge everyone to listen and take this advice. So anyone that wants to explore further, I understand that you are fully loaded, so we're not all going to be calling you and emailing you. Where can people learn more?
Well, I'm Dr. Catherine Clinton everywhere. That's my social media handle. That's my website, drcatherineclinton.com. But there are many people out there, researchers who don't have platforms,
Mm,
but have books, right? So Gerald Pollack, that I mentioned with the fourth phase
mm,
of water, he's absolutely amazing. He does a water conference each year in Europe, bringing together all of these researchers who are looking into water. One of my favorite books and researchers, Wan Ho, she wrote The Rainbow of Life and the Worm and the Rainbow. And she really looked at this idea of quantum communication and proton jumping, like we were talking about
mm,
before, really creating this network within the body. There's many researchers out there. There is a quantum biology department out of UCLA, and they offer a monthly sort of talk about the latest research around quantum biology. So what I do is I just sort of sneak around, and I'm just
mm.
standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Um,
Uh-huh.
just they are doing the research, and I am able to kind of turn that into clinical practice. And the
Mm,
reason why I'm able to do that so readily is the side effects of suggesting this. This isn't a new drug with a long list
mm,
of side effects. The side effects of, earthing or getting outside, being in nature are so wonderful that I'm able to adopt this readily in my clinical practice,
mm.
because this isn't something that we need to wait and see. Will this injure someone? touching the earth, right? No, it won't. And that really gets at some of this adaptogenic property that plants have, that these therapies have, that there's that relationship. We evolved over millennia with this way of life, and we've walked away from it. So returning to it is almost a no-brainer. So I encourage people to check out the Fourth Phase of Water, check out Maywan Ho's work and her books, Life on the Edge by Jamal Khalili. He did a wonderful job kind of taking us up until like 2016 or 17 with the latest quantum biological research, how our cells and cells of migratory birds can really utilize the magnetic field of the earth, how quantum biology is at play, quantum phenomenon is at play with sight, with smell. There's so many amazing things happening out there with quantum biology that it's just, the research keeps coming in, and there's so many outlets to find this information. And I love that a lot of it is so free and accessible, because I think for us to make a paradigm shift or make a perspective change in health, it's really important to go from the ground up. Right, because we know that this research isn't getting the most funding out there because it's not being backed by a medical device or a pharmaceutical intervention. So really bringing these free accessible tools to everybody to start utilizing, and then demanding a deeper, more in-depth look at health and disease from our healthcare system is really something that I'm excited about.
Yeah, you're talking about utopia. I hope we get there. You know, it'll be amazing to see it one day. To walk into a hospital, you open a door and you just walk through the door to a field that you're standing on. You know, that'd be nice. I wanted to thank you for joining us. I mean, this was an awesome deep dive. I feel like, you know, there's a lot more to talk about. We'll probably have you back at some point to go deeper into some of these areas. But this is eye-opening and certainly helpful. And thank you for all those resources also, so people can keep learning. So go to the website, anyone that wants to understand and learn more about Dr. Clinton's work. Everything, as she said, is in her name. We'll put those notes in there so everyone can find. Thank you again for joining us. I think this was truly awesome and people will benefit a lot.
Well, thank you so much. It was an honor being on here talking about my favorite subjects, and I'd love to come back and keep talking quantum biology with you.
We will. All right, thanks.
Thank you.